I'd like to welcome everybody out to our City Council work meeting for Wednesday, June 9th, 2021. We will begin with a review of this evening's agenda. Any items that we need to make adjustments to today? Okay, we'll move on to future agenda items. Any items that the council members would like to have added to a future agenda?
I think we've already set this up for an agenda item, but I think we need to have a review of our policies and enforcement ordinances around non-compliant construction, and I think probably the encroachment is part of that, but with this issue that Jared brought to our attention this week about this ridiculous
Not even trying.
situation, yeah, I mean, it's just, they didn't even care. We gave them a cease order, and I just find that an untenable situation that we need to fix. So, I think we've already established we need to get into that, but if we're not getting into that soon, then let's put that on the next agenda, so.
I have something that I'd like to just discuss in regards to water, since we do have our own, since we are the water company. I'd like in our next meeting to have a conversation. I know the governor just mandated that the state facilities only water twice a week to let the grass die, that kind of stuff, or go dormant, not die. I'd like to see if there's any recommendation from our staff if we can follow suit in some appropriate places so that we can be part of the solution and not part of the problem. And then what, if any, ability we have to address or make recommendations to our water user, our private citizens and their water use. I know that there's a lot of limits to what we can and can't do, but maybe just having some education out there so that we can speak to it when our residents ask, as a body, would be a helpful thing. So we can get those on next week's agenda. I know it's probably pretty full, but that's.
I was gonna bring that up later, but.
Well, fine.
No, I agree with you. I think we should look at whatever we can do or say.
If there's something that we have the power to do, it might be time to start seriously considering taking some action as a community and as a water provider. So
I'll address it in our committee reports, but the water situation is bad.
It's really bad. So
Really bad.
and if people stopped watering their lawn, would be much better. So it's not perfect, but it would help.
It would help.
Any other items that we'd like to put on a future agenda?
Mayor, I have one.
Yes, ma'am.
We've been contacted by a company that is called Bird Ride. It's an e-scooter company that's interested in introducing their product to Harriman. Is there any interest by this council?
Is it a private organization,
It's a private company.
private company?
Is there any interest by this council to pursue this in our area right now?
I am not.
I don't foresee it being something that I would be open to at this time. Maybe a couple of years from now, I just don't see it as something that, with all the other things that are going on, would be appropriate for us to address at this particular time.
I don't wanna speak. I'm not necessarily interested in doing it, but at the same time, I know that there would be some of our residents who would have an interest in that, and it's hard for me to just say no to something that I haven't heard about or what their proposal is or what they're trying to accomplish. But if it's generally, if it's a bit, if it's,
I think
not
it
only
needs
no,
to
but hell
be-
no, okay.
I think it needs to be tied into a broader, well, it needs to have the ability to tie into adequate transit options as well.
Yep.
Which are not in place at this point for us. It may be something that I think has merit to look at down the road. Once we have a couple of these the community college, for instance, come in and better transit options for that. But right now, just to introduce it into a community as a standalone thing, where we just, in my mind, just don't have a ton of walkable area where that would facilitate a good option for people. Just adding it into a community where we just don't, again, we have a deficit in some transportation options.
It's just a mess, I
I
guess.
think it would just create issues for us, to be honest.
It's really dark. We're all gonna be asleep.
So why don't we switch that so it's the see-through one, not the. All right. Any other items for?
Yeah, that one down there.
All right.
figure it out.
Any items on the leadership task list review that we need to address today? No? Okay, awesome. We will move on to item 2.1, which is,
Just one thing.
Yes, ma'am.
That is an update to it. We presented on the volunteer boards last time, May, whatever date that was, 26th, I think. That will come back to you until the first August meeting.
first August meeting, thank you. Appreciate that. Okay, we will now move on to item 2.1, active transportation plan discussion. Jonathan, is he around here?
Yeah, right here.
Oh, okay, there you are. I had too many lawyers in my way.
I'm sorry. So the active transportation plan is something that we started back last fall. This is like other master plans, something that needs to be recommended by planning commission and then approved by city council at some point. We've been to planning commission twice. Public hearing was open then. It is now open. We have not yet received comment. What we want to do is now start getting this in front of city council. We'll obviously come back to you once we have a recommendation from planning commission. But anyway, what I wanted to do is, so we have some really good consultants who have helped us to get to this point, who have helped us through the comments the planning commission has made. Jeremy Searle behind me, he'll give a presentation on this and I'll leave it to him.
Great. So again, my name is Jeremy Searle. I'm with WCG. Really happy to be here with you. And I gotta say, it's been a real pleasure working with your staff. They're amazing, and I've had a great time working with them. To start off, usually we have Bryce talk about why we need an active transportation plan. So he bailed on us tonight, but that's okay.
Sounds about right.
He's here in picture, right?
Yeah, he's here in picture. I think you guys are familiar with this. Active transportation plans are important. They provide a way for people to get around, to get to key destinations. It helps improve air quality, improve health, improve the livability of your community. It gives more equitable transportation options for everyone. So there's a lot of benefits for an active transportation plan. These are some of the key people on the project team. I'm here this evening, and then we also have Jordan King here tonight. That'll talk a little bit about.
You
our
can just
public
call me
outreach.
King though.
Yeah, our pictures got.
I don't know why
slid.
it's doing that.
That's okay.
Is your highness acceptable?
I think I could take this. It's fine.
It's not that way in there. Yes.
To start off, I am gonna have Jordan King jump in here because one of the most important parts of this plan was our public outreach, and we really wanted to do a good job with that. Make sure that the citizens were on board and that we heard from them about what's important to them, where some of these key destinations and important things are. So anyway, I'm gonna turn it for a second over to Jordan.
Sorry, we're trying to-
No, that's all right. Technical.
Just sharing a window instead of sharing the whole screen.
We've decided this room has gremlins and it just go around and change things.
Yeah.
Well, that's all right. While he's getting that set up, I'll just introduce myself for a minute. My name's Jordan King. I work for Kimley Horn and Associates, an engineering firm. And I coordinate public outreach projects for this project. I was the public outreach specialist. Like Jonathan and Jeremy mentioned, active transportation is very involved with what your residents are interested in, as well as what are the best needs for the city. And so as part of an active transportation plan, we did a fairly robust public input survey. So hopefully some of you, if not all of you, saw this at some point. And we'll talk a little bit about what we found out from that, but some of the ways that we reached the cities, we worked with the communications team here as part of your staff. They were fantastic to work with. We were able to use social media to get information about what an active transportation plan is, why the city needs one, and then get them to our survey. We also planted H-stake signs all around the city at key public meeting points, Blackwood Reservoir, near elementary schools and high schools and middle schools, at high traffic intersections, hiking trails, biking trails, all throughout the city to try and get people to the public survey as well. It had a QR code on it where they could just scan it with their phone and would take them right to the survey. We also hosted information about the active transportation plan on the city's website. And so that was all there as well. I also spent a couple of Saturdays at Smith's and at Winco bugging people outside, trying to get them to fill out my survey. And I also live in Harriman, which was an added benefit because I got to be a little more passionate about the results of this project and the results of the survey because it's where I live. So, the other key things that we did was a public, after we had the public survey, we did a virtual public meeting where we took the results of that survey, presented some of the information that you'll see from Jeremy in a little bit as part of our presentation, and then gathered information back from our residents about that as well. Here's some of the, so here were some of the examples of some of the outreach. That big white sign in the middle was the H-stake sign that we put around the city. We had some out here at the park out in front, and then social media posts, and then that was kind of what the cover page of our survey looked like. We were able to kind of nail down different areas of the city to make sure we were hitting, every different part. We had just over 401 respondents. For an active transportation plan in a city of this size, that's actually a pretty good response. So we were happy with that. When we did the public meeting, we had participation via Zoom. We also broadcast it on Facebook Live on the city's website. We had over 1,000 views of the recorded meeting. So we had 17 people participate actively live throughout the entire presentation, and then over 1,000 people go back and view it after the fact. So it was fairly great response with that. So we felt really good. Biggest takeaways, so these are just high level takeaways from the survey. Data collected, supported, so that we collected data as a team to help develop our plan, and we shared that data within the survey, and what we found out from our residents matched the data that our team collected. So that helps support our plan for the active transportation in Harriman. Residents wanted to see more trail connections, trails and paths in general were big hot ticket items. And then walking, running, biking, and hiking were the highest priorities for Harriman residents. That's no surprise, I'm sure, to any of you who live in Harriman. And then we offered a variety of different types of bike lane options. We've proposed several types in the plan, but buffered bike lanes where there was some kind of barrier, whether it was just striping on the road, for those who don't know what a buffered bike lane is, or a space in between where the travel lane is and where bikes are riding was the highest preferred method, but there was support for others as well. So I'll turn it back to Jeremy to actually talk about what's in the plan.
So we did a lot of work and analysis. We took the results from the public outreach and what they preferred, and we looked at the key destinations in the city. That's one of the strengths of Harriman, is there's a lot of cool places to go, right? You've got the reservoir, you've got the canyons, you've got a lot of parks and features there, and we wanted to make sure that people could get there easily and efficiently. And so we looked at those key destinations and tried to fill in those gaps. So here's a map of all the proposed facilities for the active transportation system in Harriman. And it may be hard to see, we do have a GIS map that we can pull up later. And we can zoom in on different things if you guys have questions or want to look closer at something. But as you can see from this, it's a pretty comprehensive network here. The brown lines are buffered bike lanes. We've got red is the proposed, typical bike lanes. Green are paved paths, and then as well as some other facilities. So we'll kind of go through these in a little bit more detail. So these are the on-road bike facilities. So your typical bike lanes. You can see those go throughout the city, and I think we've got a really good network to get you to the key points to the city, to to like the reservoir, to the canyons, up to Transit, up near Daybreak, so things like that. This is the proposed paved path network. You can see those in green. We also have some in kind of this pinkish color. Anyway, up here in the corner up there on the west side, there's kind of the pinkish color. Those are dual paths, so that's both equestrian and paved paths up there. So good set of facilities there. Our next section here, these are some proposed intersection improvements to help bicyclists and pedestrians cross some of these major roadways. Those can be barriers sometimes, and we want to make sure that people have an easy and safe way to get across.
What would some of those improvements include?
Yeah, so for example, some of these down by, like on Marabella near the school, those are improved crosswalks to the trail connections with our RFBs, those flashing beacons. Some of these up on 134th, where we've had a number of bicycle crashes. Those are improved bike facilities with bike boxes and improved intersection for the bikes there, so. All right, and then we also looked at some of the key sidewalk gaps. This was not meant to be a comprehensive sidewalk inventory or outline where all the sidewalks need to be. This was just to outline those key gaps in the network to get people to key destinations like schools, right? We want kids to be able to walk to school. So we've outlined some of those key missing sections of sidewalk in here. So you can see those there. So if we're okay, can we pull up the GIS map? And at this point, we really just want to open it up to you to, if there are any questions or if you want to zoom in closer or look at anything in more detail. We want you to be comfortable with the plan.
Your study doesn't, I noticed a couple of spots in there where, especially the last one where at proposed sidewalk, in recognizing where they are, it doesn't take into account what the residents in that area, it just is showing a lack of sidewalk or connectivity in that area, right?
That's correct.
Because there's a couple in there that I noticed that I would say that the residents probably don't want to see those improvements based on other conversations that we've had.
Yeah, and there's, in that downtown Harriman area, there's actually that ordinance that prohibits sidewalk from being built. And so there's one that's proposed through there that we, I guess, have an asterisk on that says it's allowed to be a 6-foot paved asphalt path instead of a sidewalk. So kind of accomplishes the same purpose, but meets the ordinance.
In regards to sidewalks, on Harriman Highway, Harriman, Maine, right where that your mouse was, if you'll zoom in there,
Yeah, right in here.
that proposed sidewalk right there.
Yeah.
Is that sufficient? So just to the left side of your screen where there's the proposed sidewalk there, yeah. Is that sufficient to connect all of that? As that school district has proposed that's gonna be the students are gonna have to safe walk down Harriman Highway to get to the elementary school in that area. We had a conversation with the school district and I wanna make sure that entire space is on the plan as a sidewalk to fully connect that.
So maybe if I can take a stab at the answer there. So as they've been working through that plan, we also superimposed improvements to be provided by the developer.
Yeah.
And so, those items, you can kind of see his stops, right?
Yeah.
Kind of, I called it, that 6400 West, but then you have developer improvements that will continue and take from there. So no, the answer is no, but there are still planned improvements for sidewalk, but, to your point.
Is that something that, in that specific area that we need to have included to make sure that we're giving that the priority it needs to avoid? My concern here is safety of the school children. I mean, that's really my concern here. Anywhere else, we just know that's a coming problem that
Yeah.
might come up, and so that's
So
my
plans
concern.
have been approved, we reviewed it, and we're on schedule for construction, but to your point, we can still get it on there.
That might be, unless the council disagrees with me, that,
Sure.
just in this specific circumstance, just so that it's listed as an important critical piece, so that as developers or something want to come back and do something different, we can go back and say, this is part of the active transportation plan, we need you to complete this in a timely manner. That would be my 2 cents unless the council disagrees with me.
Look at 'em.
you know which piece I'm talking about, Jonathan, right?
Yes, I do.
In your view, I guess just based on, again, the information that was included, this just looks at our current footprint and what we have listed as, annexation, potential annexation area, correct?
Correct.
It didn't look, the scope didn't look beyond that of how some of these proposed trails and connections would tie into anything outside of our area, correct?
So we did look at existing facilities, along the outside. We have Bluffdale, Riverton, South Jordan's plans and where they're planning, so we do have those tied in. It's a little bit grayer out in this area, but we tried to tie into those as best we could. If there's not any other questions, the draft plan is on the website, hopefully you guys have seen that, but there's a lot more information in there. I tried to do a quick overview, I know you guys are short on time. But you feel free to go through that. If there's other questions or comments, feel free to email us or contact Jonathan or Bryce and they can get to us and we're happy to address those.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We appreciate that. We will move on to item
Real
two.
quick,
Yeah,
Mayor, Jonathan, what's the proposed timeline now of seeing this again come back or before the council?
Great, so, we're up for planning commission. I'm trying to remember, Mike, what day that is.
Next week, on
Next week.
Thursday, planning commission will, they're set up to make a recommendation to the council.
So it should be pretty
And,
quick.
and we've been there twice and they've addressed those comments. The first time we went, there were little to no comments. I take that back, no, there were comments. The second time we had some more, so addressed those. The public hearing was opened and then we plan to on the 17th, then, am I giving dates that are correct?
That's right.
Come back to the city council, with their recommendation.
Well, 17th would be the planning commission.
So I apologize. The one following, the city council after that, July 4th, it would have to be, July 14th.
Yeah, we won't make it.
July 14th, we'd come back with their recommendation for approval.
All right, thank you.
Okay. If there's no other questions, we'll move on to item 2.2, discussion regarding a text amendment adopting language to enable large project master plan communities. Chase.
Thanks, Mayor. Mitch, do I get a clicker? Sweet.
No, you just have to use your magic. Your
Let's
magic.
change it that way. Thanks. So excited. Oh, that's great, man. Yeah.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you. So this item tonight comes to you from the Planning Commission, which initiated this text amendment to Title 10 on their May 6th meeting. They held it was presented to them on the 20th, and then they did also hold a public hearing on that date as well. I'll dive into the details of what that is, obviously, but I just wanted to let you know kind of where this came from and what the PC's recommendation was. So they voted 6-0 to recommend this text amendment with one modification that I will dive into here as well. So what this is it's a zoning text amendment to Title 10 to introduce a zoning tool. It's not to create a zone in and of itself, but rather to create a tool that an owner of property could use to create a zone, as you'll see here. Oh, it's not working here, Mitch. Am I pointing in the right direction? Oh, here we go.
Somebody's head's in the way.
So the,
That would be mine.
Wendy thought it
Thank
was
you.
hers. Yeah, right.
just to give some background and some context
You
to
said
what
that.
this would look like, we have a couple of,
What's, no, I'm just kidding.
I'm gonna stand up, I don't know, maybe I can reach it. Mitch, where's my receiver for this? Is it over here?
It's down in door, base camp.
That's what did it. So what we're looking at here are just some of the zones that we have within the city. Obviously, there are different designations within each one of these zones: agricultural, residential, commercial, and manufacturing, mixed use. And then we have, as you know, recently created a special district, our Autumn Mall Special District. The tool doesn't, again, create any zones, but what it does is it would allow an owner who complies with the regulations set forth in this tool to create essentially another special district or a zone. This wouldn't be the name of the zone, this is just kind of where it would fit within the city's classifications of zones. Just for the purposes of this conversation, we're referring to it as the Large Project Master Plan Community Subzone. And you'll see why we named it that. So referring to it as this terrible acronym, right, the Large Project Master Plan Community. Why would we do this? Well, it's beneficial as a development tool for large project areas. We have a few within the city where owners have 200, 300, 400 acres of land, where traditional zoning tools might not be the best tool to develop within that area. We also have potential annexation areas outside of the city where this could also potentially be a tool where an individual owner owns, again, a large area that would be developed as one project. So rather than coming in and carving out 50, 100 subdivisions, you would use this tool to create a zone that would allow the city and the developer to work with a zoning tool to develop that entire project area. I've highlighted here in red, I don't have a pointer, the 400 acre requirement. The initial recommendation that I made to the planning commission was that this development tool only applied to developers or owners who owned at least 400 contiguous acres. Their recommendation, based upon some public feedback that they received at the hearing, was to reduce that threshold requirement to 200 acres. That would allow some of the properties and some of the owners of properties, Laguna, Malibu, that are kind of on the south end of our border, to use this tool to develop their property.
Jace, other than having potential developers that have smaller than the 400 acres, obviously encouraging, what other discussion points was there, other than to allow this to be accessible by a couple of other development groups? What else was there in that discussion of why we would want to potentially consider going less than the 400 that was originally proposed?
Well, I guess the conversation around that really didn't boil down to an exact science. It was more of looking at what you're trying to accomplish with this tool, and that would be to have more of like a planned community feel, more of a development controlled by a development agreement, and looking at where that might fit. So again, it wasn't necessarily a scientific number that we were able to come up with. It was more of just, what are we trying to accomplish here and what number makes sense? And as we discussed that with the planning commission and as they heard that public comment, that was kind of the number that they boiled down that made sense to them.
So is it just fair to say then that the recommendation from the planning commission was just based on the public feedback that they received? Okay.
Right, this, again, the idea behind this is to use it where, as you can see here in my slide, where standard zoning classifications don't really make sense. Whether that's 10 acres, 50 acres, 100 acres, that's for the council to decide, because ultimately you're the ones that control the land use within the city.
So
Right.
I'm looking for, as the city attorney, has your recommendation changed? Or is your recommendation still 400 acres?
My recommendation would be 200.
Be 200 acres?
Would be to follow what the planning commission recommended.
So you're okay with that change? You didn't have any concern?
Yeah, the initial number I came up with didn't take that public feedback into account, and as it was brought up, it actually resonated and made
And
sense.
so in your opinion, 200 is not an inappropriate number?
No.
I wanna turn then to our planner and say, what are your thoughts on that number?
It's good, because this is a tool, if we are comfortable with as a city, we may want to use it in other places like we've talked about. We've been talking with other development partners that just, we don't seem to have a vehicle to kind of negotiate these development, rights. In fact, in a way, what this is really doing is it's giving us an opportunity to formalize or create legislation that guides the master development process, which the state code amendments this year actually are saying that we need to be doing that. We need to put into our city code, how do we respond to master development requests? When do they require public hearings? What's the legislative process for those? And this helps us do that.
So my question then becomes, what happens if somebody has 299 acres and wants it?
Well, if we set it at 200,
199.
Sorry, 199 acres, yes, thank you. Sorry, 199 acres.
It would require a text amendment in order for them to.
So is there?
They could still develop under a development agreement, but it would be using our standard zoning rather than
So kind of what I'm getting at is there a place for something in between, a medium, not a large, but a medium proposed, area that would be that would have slightly different rules or smaller restrictions that would make more sense than just doing all or nothing. That's a question. That's not a trying to give direction in either way. Like, I don't know. Like, you guys are the experts. What are your thoughts on that?
To add additional scope to your question, I don't think there's a legal requirement for it, right? There, you can establish whatever acreage you think should be the threshold based upon what it is that you're trying to accomplish. So that would be my only framing of that question. I don't know. Again, I pointed out here planning principles, right? Looking at sound and modern planning principles as maybe one of our guiding principles, what would that acreage be?
Yeah, and so for me, as I look at it, 200, 400, there's a substantial difference there of how big and what can be allowed and what can you do with that much space. And I almost feel like it would almost be better to possibly create a medium-sized zoning or something another that maybe has a few more restrictions. Because what I would like to see is, in all honesty, is I'd like to encourage developers to put large properties together and really create these big, overall, well thought out, well planned, and so if there's an opportunity to give them an encouragement to say, if you go and put a couple of larger pieces of property together to hit 300 or 400 acres, we might give you, there might be some additional benefit that you receive as we receive a more developed and more thorough and planned community for our, so, I don't know, that's my thought, and that's, I think, probably more discussion for the council than it is for staff, so I don't know, what are you guys' thoughts on that?
Sorry, I'll let everybody answer.
I got a little more input on that too.
Please.
Thinking about all the properties that are available left to develop, the larger pieces are underneath South Hills or Rosecrest, or trying to become under Rosecrest. And so there aren't really any large pieces left in excess of like 100 acres. Most of them are 20, 30, 40, and they're not contiguous, so you're not gonna be combining them.
Okay.
So keep that in mind as you think through it. There's really not anything between that like 40 acre and that 200 acre, but there are several that are 200 or larger that are out.
Okay.
So
So the question becomes to, and this is the discussion I want to have with council is, do we want to encourage ones that are larger to combine?
I don't know, I think we need to keep working through it, and that might bring us some clarity.
A thought I had, and this will add to my presentation, and Michael can add to this as well, is as I've looked in other cities that have this tool or have created zones like this as well, they range anywhere from 50 acres up to 400 acres, right?
Okay.
The initial number.
So this would be high.
And
Compared to other
it'd be
communities.
in the middle, so.
Okay.
Yeah. 100 to 200 kind of seemed like the median range for most of
Okay.
the locations that I saw. But that again was based upon the principle of what they were trying to accomplish of how large or how small do we want these kind of planned communities to be, right? Do we want a 20 acre planned community, do we want a 50 acre planned community, or are we looking for more like a 100 acre, 200 acre style planned community?
So, I have a specific question. It says, where standard zoning classifications are often inadequate, what specific inadequacies are there in our existing zoning classifications that we need
It's
to
where you're
address?
trying to achieve more of a product mix. Our basic zoning looks at the world and is really trying to separate land uses.
Right.
In these large planned communities, we tend to see development interests in trying to have a finer grained mixture of land uses than we would typically allow in other zones.
So going from a bubble plan to a planned development.
Yeah,
we're getting mixed uses and just a bunch of apartments.
Yeah.
Or without putting just one singular zoning over a large area.
It's very black and white.
And then having to come back and try and work through each of those individual pieces as they develop out in different ways.
well, I can understand that. I just, my limited experience with seeing something that happens under some of our master development agreements, right, is that there's a plan and then properties get moved around and switched, and what was supposed to be here is now over here, and what was gonna be 600 single-family homes is now 200 single-family homes, and was gonna be hundred and fifty multifamilies is now 900 multifamily, you know? And that kind of flexibility, I can understand why there's market demands, there's, street layouts change, topography problems, like I get it. But I also don't necessarily like the idea of empowering something that circumvents the general plan and zoning that we have in place. Does that make sense? This almost sounds like a tool to say we don't like the zoning that's in place, so we wanna come up with new zoning that trumps all that. Does that make sense? I mean, I understand what the goal is, but I also don't want to diminish the value of a general plan and all the zoning that already exists.
Is this a zone or is this
It's not a zone though.
This is a tool that allows an owner to come in with a proposed zone.
So this,
So this doesn't create the zone itself, and to your point, Steve, there's still that hierarchy of the general plan and then the zoning falls under it. That would apply here as well. There would still be the general plan and any proposed zoning, which would still be approved at your discretion as the city council, would have to fall within that general plan once adopted by.
But again, we're talking about larger master planned areas that has multiple, or may have multiple different zoning components to it.
And we're fortunate that we're in this room, right? Cause we can look at our general plan right here and see kind of what these proposed uses and densities are, and then see how that plays out on the map right next to it with the zoning, right? They're, even within areas that are shaded the same on the general plan, you've got a little bit different zoning in some of those. And what this allows an owner to do is to say, hey, I've got a bunch of different types of proposed uses in the general plan. Here's what I think would work, given those uses that are approved in the general plan by the council.
Yeah. It still retains the land use authority with the
Yeah,
council.
it doesn't throw that out, exactly. And I'll get to that here in just a
Fair
second.
enough, sorry.
And that actually, that's highlighted here on my last two points on this slide, right? It goes through by statute and by case law, a required hearing process at the planning commission, and then it's ultimately at the discretion of the city council. So it would be codified just like any other zone. So it would come through public hearing process through the planning
so
commission.
really it's just an opportunity for them to come in and request a zone as an entire project as opposed to trying to force everything into the exact boxes that we've already put on.
It's the tool, right, exactly. Yeah. So how it works, you would have your owner who owns that threshold acreage that's contiguous, come to the city and apply for that using this tool that you could potentially codify here. The application by code has to include a few things. We would have to describe what the subzone or subzones, it could be more than one, those are going to be called or referred to as. A map of the property. Oh, jumped here. We would have to list, just as we do with any other zones, what the permitted conditional accessory uses are going to be. And then this is one of the things that Michael brought up, there has to be a proposed MDA with it. And I'm gonna just jump to that part here. So that MDA has to require a number of things, and we're no strangers to MDAs here in Harriman, obviously, but this would all be codified, what is required to be within a development agreement for an owner who is trying to use this tool. So again, to start off, the planning commission still has to review this, it has to go through the statutory, land use public hearing requirements with regard to those items in the MDA that apply to the planning commission. The city council still has the ultimate determination, so we have no obligation to approve a development agreement, and we have no obligation to even grant them any rights under this tool. So if they come in and apply, they still don't have any vested rights until the council approves a development agreement and or the subzone. The development agreement has to include a number of things. It can include beyond this list, these are just the minimum requirements. We've gotta have a master plan of the project, again, showing what the uses are going to be, where that backbone infrastructure is, parks, open space, the things that we as a city like to see. Development standards for all of the uses, development, design guidelines for all of the uses. And then procedures for making changes to the project, so an amendment process, what the term of the agreement's going to be, a process for amending that if we needed to, and then an indemnification provision, so if something with the project were to go awry, the city's never liable for any of the damages related to that. Any questions about this slide before I jump on. Again, this is all stuff we've seen and stuff we would include beyond this is at our discretion. Sherry, sorry. I don't break. Another aspect of this is a large portion of it becomes administrative then, and just like we see with other zones, once a subzone is established, once the permitted conditional and accessory uses are authorized by the council, the implementation of that project as set forth in the development agreement becomes administrative in nature. There are still requirements by state statute that there's still items, development applications that have to be approved by the planning commission and city council. We're not gonna get around those by entering into a development agreement. Those are still applicable. But again, largely it becomes just an administrative process.
Can you give me an example of what might be an exception to that?
A change to infrastructure, upsizing, engineering requirements. Yeah, the location of certain infrastructure based upon engineering principles, things of that nature. So not every item comes back to the city council under.
Every single time, yeah.
Right. And again, like if some of the uses were to shift from one area to another, and a road were to be rerouted, or things that wouldn't be changed obviously would be the zoning. That's not something that can be changed administratively.
Yeah.
The number of units, the density of units, the types of units, those types of things wouldn't change under, it's not something that can be changed
That
under
would
the
all have,
agreement.
that would all have to go back to,
It would,
that would all come back to the council.
correct, yeah.
So that control is still there.
I wanted to just review the language really quickly. Mitch, do you mind pulling that up for us? I didn't include it in the packet, that was my fault, I failed to send it to Jackie. But it's very simple, is really why I wanted to just review it, because it's only a few sections, because again, this is just the tool. So if you'll scroll down, Mitch. So this is our chapter 8 that exists currently. There's no changes to this, you see, again, those main zones that I highlighted are agricultural, residential, commercial, recreational, those zones, and then some of the classifications within there. If you'll scroll down a little bit, Mitch, a little bit more, keep going for me. Keep going, keep going. Keep going. So here's the first change that you would potentially see would be when a owner who meets that threshold requirement comes to us with an application, this is where it would fall. Again, this is not the zone, this is just the tool. That's where it would fall within our existing city code. Now, the proposed language for this, Mitch, if you'll scroll down for me.
Hey, can I interrupt?
Yeah.
Sorry, this is really bad. But, why wouldn't we just use the plan development overlay zone?
So, good question. One of the reasons why, and Michael touched on this earlier, was
Sorry.
this requires the codification of a development agreement. And the planned overlay zone, for a large part, also uses our existing zoning types within that. One of the reasons we would look at this would be to say, all right, given the size of this project, whether that's in the city or a potential annexation area, the existing zoning that we have in place just isn't adequate to address kind of what we're trying to accomplish as a city, what the developer would like to accomplish with regard to a larger master planned style community. So it makes up for some of the deficiencies.
But you explained that earlier, cause I can go back and listen. I
No,
just wanted to
well,
make sure.
so in this specific example, what would happen, let's say we did a plan development for an annexation area that we've been studying. We would have to forecast the exact location of all of the zoning types and densities throughout the whole project now. And given the scale of the project, we're making decisions for the marketplace that's gonna be 2, 3, 4, 5,
10, 15
years.
years.
Years down the road. And we're making all those decisions now. And that's what they're trying to create a tool that's flexible, that protects our interests, that reflects our objectives, and yet still allows the developer to respond to the marketplace. So it's a very principle-centered agreement that still allows for flexibility to a level that we're comfortable with.
Oh, thank you, and I'll go back and
Yeah.
listen to that.
Thanks, Michael.
Thanks.
So this is the proposed language to Title 10. It would be plugged in, under, as chapter 33. This would be a new section, a new chapter within our Title 10 land use code. The very first section talks about some of those things that we identified initially of why it makes sense, why it would be useful for the city, why it would be beneficial for a potential owner that meets that threshold, and just kind of lays out some of those findings.
You guys talked about the 400 versus 200.
We did, yeah, and the point on that, I wasn't sure if you heard that, Sherry, the feedback that we got at the planning commission public hearing was that 200 would be a more appropriate one, and that's actually the recommendation the planning commission made with their vote for approval. So that's, again, just the next section. The basic requirement is that anyone who owns over that threshold requirement, whatever you determine it to be, qualifies to use this tool, or to come in with this tool. Mitch, do you mind scrolling down?
Qualifies to request.
Thank you.
We still
That's a
have the
great
choice to make the decision.
Yes, and that's in this next section, right? This talks about the process for applying for it. And again, one thing I pointed out that I'll highlight here again, the application for a subzone creates no rights in the property owner until any such subzone and the master development agreement are approved by the city council and recorded against the property. And so, again, you're under no obligation to approve either of those things. You can come if it makes sense to you at the time, based upon what you're trying to accomplish with regard to the land use of that area. It doesn't prohibit them from developing. They can come in under our normal subdivision using our normal zoning tools. This would just give them an additional opportunity to maybe propose something different and or better.
Am I understanding that correctly, though, that they would have to do this new subzone and a master development agreement simultaneously?
They would. You
Okay.
can't approve the subzone without a
Got
using this tool. If you'll scroll down for me a little bit more. So again, we talked about this already, the contents of the application, they've gotta have the name of the zone, a map of it, what the proposed conditional or the permitted conditional and accessory uses are going to be in the zone, and then come with a proposed master development agreement. As we know, and as you're well versed with, that's a process, right, of approving that. It doesn't just show up and we should rubber stamp it and send it through. So it'll be a process going through the city council and then running it through the planning commission for a public hearing to get that approved with the owner or the applicant in this case. Again, this highlights just the requirements of the development agreement, lists what needs to be included in there. And it just states here that you have your discretion, right, to approve or deny a development agreement, right? You're under no obligation to approve it. If it comes to you and makes sense, that's where you would exercise that discretion.
Is that language right there sufficient enough to prevent us from being taken to court over not approving something?
Yes, and the reason why is because it doesn't, again, prohibit an owner from developing their land.
It's specifically this method. Okay.
And that's why we're creating the tool rather than creating the zone, right? If we would create the zone,
You would have to allow them in.
if that zone were applied to the land, we would have to allow them to develop under the zone. No, go ahead.
I should just listen to that and then I'll ask.
No, go ahead. I'm almost done, Sherry, so
No,
go
I
ahead.
just, I'm just confused, I guess, and I'm sorry I missed the first part of this conversation, but, so if per se it's an annexation, right? And you want this, not a zone really, right? This
You would
project
use the
plan.
tool to create the subzone, right?
And so when annexed in, you already are identifying subzones or you're not? I don't understand. Does annex in as a particular zone? So you are identifying everything you said.
Well, the subzone is basically like, it's like the MDA. It's like taking the MDA and making that the zoning tool. Essentially is what you're doing.
So so it just annexes in as a subzone in MDA, whatever that.
Right, whatever they call the development or that zone.
And that's not uncommon in general, right? Master development agreements are by statute an amendment to the land use code. And that would just be an additional provision of that particular development agreement. That's why we run it through the whole land use process, public hearing, procedure.
Which, and again, I think that the issue we've seen before is the requirements of the master development agreement have sometimes forced our hands in approving certain zoning changes and, especially density changes that are less popular, but still contractually obligated to do, right? And that's without this special tool. That already happens, right?
Kinda will anyway though, I mean, you're
Yeah.
not gonna be able to tell them, no. You're still gonna have the same protections.
You're right, and there will be contractual obligations, right, to develop the land under the development agreement. And this tool essentially allows both the city and a future developer or owner of that land to determine what that contractual relationship is going to look like. Beyond what our current zoning would allow. Mitch, if you'll go down, I think
So
that's,
essentially, we can create a zone with any zoning requirements, restrictions. We can get creative as we're creating this new zone.
Yeah.
And the MDA at the same time.
again, 100% at your discretion.
So we have, so this, just to clarify what he said, because that's an interesting point that I hadn't considered. We can add additional restrictions that we wouldn't normally be able to add in the event that we went through this process.
Right, they would come in with a proposed list of permitted conditional accessory uses, and you could add or take away from those, or expand or diminish. Them.
Okay.
And standards.
I.e., if you're doing
And
so many
standards, correct.
acres,
Correct.
instead of just a percentage of green space, you could create a large green space amenity requirement, right? That kind of
Yeah.
thing, something that makes
So
kind of
it
sense
is,
all in
it is
all.
really cool. A lot of the cities that I studied when I was drafting this language and working on this, they codify the zone itself and just apply that, rather than creating the tool, which might change the language of your development agreement, your
Yeah.
permitted uses, depending on the topography of the area, the, potential uses, the build out time. So this codifies just the tool and then allows an owner who meets that threshold to say, given all of the circumstances of this area, this is what I think would be good, and allows the city then to come back in and weigh those considerations.
And one of the things, Sherry, that I asked earlier that Chase addressed was, general plan, existing zoning are still the guiding principle, right? They still trump whatever this would be. And so, in the process of approving this, it would have to be reconciled with what existing plans already exist. Does that make sense? So,
And you'll send us a copy of this?
Yeah, I apologize, I didn't send this in the packet, but this is the draft language that I presented to the planning commission and that they made the recommendation upon, so I'll send this, to the council, and again, this is just on a work meeting for today, so you can direct me when to bring it back and where, or what changes to make, after you've had a chance to look at this, but that last item, the administration implementation of a subzone, is just what I touched on earlier, is that it then becomes essentially just a development under a zone like any other subdivision might be. They come in, largely it's just an administrative process. There are those requirements, those items that have to be approved by the planning commission and or city council that would still come through, so. I'll send a copy of this out right now to all of you so I don't forget, but that's all I had unless you have any other questions about this tool.
Do we have any properties that are less than that are between 200 and 400 acres right now that would qualify for this tool?
So we have Laguna and Malibu within the city boundaries right now.
But aren't those
that
both
qualify.
over, aren't those both over 400?
No, they're separate they're separate properties. If combined, they're over 400. If taken separately,
One's like 750 and one's like 250.
250, yeah.
So one would, but the other one would.
Malibu's smaller, Lagoon's like.
And I guess for me, trying to, I guess, determine what that appropriate number of acreage is, I mean, I don't know, it may be, in my head, I'm kinda thinking, well, maybe we start higher
Yeah.
at the 400 and actually see how the process works. I mean, 200 acres is still
It's
a
still
lot of land.
down, yeah.
But again, maybe, I don't know, maybe we start higher and see how it works, and if it works good and then maybe we can go back in and adjust, I don't know, just a thought.
Well, it's just a text change.
Right.
It's not that difficult for us as a council to
Just
go back and amend it. To me, I kind of would probably fall in line with what you suggest, Clint, of keeping it higher for now, just because I wanna see how well it works, and see if that's something we want to, cause it may be even less, maybe 100 acres might be the right number.
Yeah, I
And
don't know.
if we can see if we see it works, I'm happy to consider much lower numbers.
Yeah.
Because I'd like to see.
I'm excited to have the tool, I just wanna see the tool in action.
I'd like to listen to the planning commission meeting on that too, to understand why they.
And I asked that question, Sherry, before you came in, and I think that, correct me if I'm wrong, is they made the modification or the recommendation of the modification based on input they received from people at the planning commission. It doesn't sound like it was necessarily from discussion amongst themselves, it was just based on the input that the comments
One
that they
public
received.
comment, so
So,
they
like I
agreed
said-
with that.
I had that exact same question.
I'd like to say it was scientific, but it wasn't. It was just what makes sense, given what's already in our city and, where we would potentially use this.
Even a quarter flip can be scientific.
Yeah.
Yeah, for what it's worth though, I don't have any reason not to accept that recommendation from the VC.
Like I say, that was just
I
my own
I
question
can't-
in my head.
don't have anything compelling that tells me that
It's not.
we should only reserve this for 400 or
plus.
three, like, I could see where it could be useful at 175 or 208, right? Like, there's reasons where it could be, but
Have those landowners expressed any interest at this point to? Because I mean, there's public comment, then there's the actual property owners. If those property owners come to us and express interest in using this particular tool, is that
Yes.
is that a yes?
Yes.
Okay.
And the public comment was from one of those property owners.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Okay,
I think that's important context.
that's what they wanted 200.
Oh, okay, that, yeah.
and that's just me trying to
400 where they
understand
cut their
specifically
value,
what it
I
is.
understand.
Okay.
So
So
that,
would
that
you
makes sense. They would, somebody wants to specifically use this who has more, or less than 400 or more
Less
than
than
200,
400,
yeah.
yes.
So would you like me to bring this back on the discussion and action item agenda
I
at the
would,
next meeting?
because we still can, we can,
You can push it down the road
Push
if
it.
you need to.
I would.
I would put it on discussion action and then we
Yeah, I
can,
wanna read this, yes, one too.
we can still adjust
Yeah,
the number up
once we
and down.
get the copy
Once
there
you get the
tonight, but
language,
yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
No, thank you, that was helpful and insightful. With that, we will move on to item 3.1, fiscal year 2021-2022 tentative budget presentation. Alan,
We need to move to,
It just says, well, the agenda was, or we can do it after that.
Okay, before we get to the actual numbers, there's several things we want to address on what's going on with the budget. First of all, state and county were supposed to, release the new tax rates yesterday. As of today, they have not done it. So the rates that are in my calculations are my calculations. We're gonna be asking you to
This is
approve
my
a
shocked
tax
face.
rate that is one that I've calculated. Hopefully it's what it's gonna be. We've also used my calculations to come up with our, budget amounts for the fire area. We'll also, the HCC, it's a calculation of my estimate of the, tax rate, because we're at the meeting that we actually have to approve it unless we come back to a special meeting between now and the 20th. So if I've messed up on the rate you're approving tonight, we'll have to reconvene to fix it, so, okay? But the county, the state, are supposed to work together on these. Yesterday was the day they were supposed to release them. As of an hour ago, they had not released them yet, so. So we're moving
Once again,
forward
shock
with
face.
that the best we can. Also, just keep in mind as we're going through the budget tonight, that our, CDA, CRAs, and our HCC are not technically part of our city. Okay, we treat them as a blended component unit, and we report them that way. But the fact that we're postponing our city budget doesn't mean that we can just postpone them as well, so they will be moving forward. Okay? Also, you remember that as we approve our budget in the spring, it's typically an amendment of our current budget. So we're revising our 2021 budget and we're proposing the 2022 budget. Now, just because of the fact that we can't approve a revised budget after the end of the year, we need to move forward with the revised budget for 2021, and we'll postpone the 2022 till after our truth and taxation hearing. Okay? Does that make sense to you? Okay, now, the other thing is, we talked about last week, is that we are going to need to include the fire tax in our city budget rather than in a separate fire district. And this is just due to the fact that our district was not created until January 4th. County's holding us firm to the January 1st deadline, and so in order to have that revenue not be lost for the year, it needs to be in our city. So, if you look at the top line there, in our current year budget, we have $888,000 budgeted for property taxes. And, you see that going to $6,860,000 next year. Almost $6 million of that is the fire tax money coming into now general fund. You can see the line below that in the box, that is the property taxes that was originally proposed in the budget that you've seen. So that top line is what it's changing to. The one in the box is what it was. Okay, now, because it's not going to the fire districts, it's going to the general fund, we have an expenditure line that will move $5,947,148 to the fire district. This is my estimate of what the exact amount of tax will be that we collect for the fire. So it'll come in our property tax line, it'll go to the fire district in an expenditure line. And then you'll see in the bottom, we had originally budgeted to collect $5,947,000 in property taxes. Well, that's going to zero now, and the revenue coming into the fire service district will come in as a transfer from the general fund. So those are the main changes you're gonna see because of what we did. That's what's holding us off for 2 months, but the real thing is we've got to propose the tax change before we can move forward with the budget. So we're going to see the 17.15 mils that was being collected last year by UFSA will now move to the city. Our residents will not pay any additional taxes. It's just that the city will be collecting the entire amount now, rather than a portion of it going to Unified Fire Service Authority. So we will now be controlling the money coming in when we withdrew from the fire service area January 1st.
I don't know who's listening to this, but I think it's always important to say they might see more taxes as far as dollar amount, but it won't be based on the levy amount, it will be based on the valuation of property. Everyone always complains you raise taxes, and it's like, no, the levy is here, but.
Same mill levy, just a
Yeah.
higher,
Yeah.
they're paying more because their assessed valuation
Yeah, exactly.
increased.
It's just so important that people know that, cause it's not, cause we're raising taxes, it's just because.
We are not increasing our budget by $6 million at all.
In general, and this is not in every case, but in general, you should never see the tax rate go up, or your tax dollars go up. As long as your house property value is either raising or falling at the same rate as everyone else's, you're not gonna see any change in taxes, okay? Because the way this works is as the values go up, rates go down. As the values come down, the rates go up. Utah State property taxes are structured so that a city or county gets the same amount of tax every year. Okay, that $888,000 that we were budgeted last year is what our tax amount is. Now, we get a little bit more this year because of new growth.
Yeah.
Okay,
All that new
But
growth
I
added
guess I should just,
$2,863.
not to interrupt you, but I guess I should say that
That's
for the public watching, the city is not raised your
Right.
taxes. There might be other entities on that multiple list
That's
of
true.
entities on your bill that did raise taxes, but
Harriman City, the Fire Service District, and the
HCC.
HCC did not raise
Yeah.
taxes.
The way our structure is though, if our valuations go up 10%, the tax rate's gonna go down 10%. Okay, now, where you don't get that exactly is say your neighbor's goes up 10%, but yours only goes up 6%. Yours might not raise as much as his, or vice versa, because property values do not grow and shrink at the same rate, okay? As long as they're all growing and shrinking at the same rate, you don't see a change in the amount of tax, okay? So you might see some difference, but it's not because of an additional tax being charged, but the tax rates are set so that we receive the same amount of money every year regardless of what your value is, okay? And so,
Unless we change our mill levy.
right, unless we
Are
set our
not
mill levy, okay? Right, and Harriman City has not done that. We established a tax rate back in 2000 and, maybe it was 2000 exactly. It has never been changed by the city itself, but it gets adjusted every year by the state tax commission and the county, so that it makes it so that we get the same amount every year. And so, you know, you look back in 2008, 2009, when everyone's property values plummeted, tax rates went up. Ever since then, you've seen them going the other direction because values are going up, so. Yeah, it's part of what we do now.
There are some, I guess, services out there though that, do some have the ability to actually keep their tax rate the exact same so that there's no movement on it, so that as those values go up, they can actually collect a little bit more, or for some of those entities out there, or no?
I don't believe so.
Okay.
I believe if you're going to, in fact, I know. If
State
you're
statute
going
requires
to, if you're going to increase the amount of money you receive, you've got to do truth
Through
in
the
taxation.
taxation, okay. Okay, I think that's good for everyone to understand.
Alan, before we possibly adjourn here, is there anything else that you think we should discuss before we go into our general meeting?
That's what I had on my list.
So, okay, so, with that, we do have a couple of special meetings, so we probably wanna get into those. Yes,
I guess, as far as budget, that was the only thing, but I do have the water, or the road bond issue.
is that something that's in our general meeting that we need to talk about right now? Or we can come back and talk about it?
Come
Great.
back, yeah.
Alright, so the intent will be to come back in and finish those discussions. With that, I would accept a motion to temporarily adjourn our work meeting and go into our community development meetings.
So moved.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Yeah, those will all be in there. It's in the official general meeting.
You're all in.
Come on, guys, we gotta pick up the pace. We gotta do that.
My God, that lawyer talks too much.
I show up ready to work.
A little sassy.